In March 2024, on the 80th floor of the China World Hotel in Beijing, the annual dinner of the Chinese Private Equity Fund conference was underway. 327 people. My father, Richard, stood at the head table, holding a glass of Lafite, and declared to the hall full of financial elite, "My daughter is a complete waste." When he said that, I was sitting at table 1, 38 meters away. He didn't see me. He had no idea he was being live-streamed. The real-time footage of the banquet was transmitted to every corner through the internal system, and the person in charge of that system was the tech company I had invested in. 3 seconds later, the feed was cut. Not by me. It was my partner, Malcolm. He sat in the backstage monitoring room, 3 screens in front of him simultaneously playing different angles of the banquet hall. The moment he saw my father raise his glass and open his mouth, his finger was already hovering over the emergency cutoff button. He hesitated for half a second, not because he was afraid of offending anyone, but because he knew me too well, knew that I didn't need anyone to shield me from the storm. Then he pressed it. He told me later that his reason for pressing it wasn't that he was afraid I'd be upset. It was, "If that old man keeps talking, we'll have to switch PR teams tonight." My name is Grace. I'm 32 years old. I have no business card, no social media accounts, no Wikipedia page. If you search my name in the internal databases of the financial world, you'll find one entry, Zhao Capital, actual controller, assets under management, undisclosed. The word undisclosed carries more weight in the financial world than any number. Because it implies 2 possibilities: either it's too small to be worth disclosing, or it's so large that disclosure itself would trigger market fluctuations. Most people guess the former. A few know it's the latter. People in the financial circle call me the short-selling ghost. That name wasn't my choice, it was a nickname coined by a Bloomberg journalist in 2020. He wrote a piece titled "The Short-Selling Ghost of China's Market," trying to uncover the person behind the mysterious account that profited wildly during the 4 circuit breaker events in the U.S. stock market. He investigated for 3 months and found nothing, eventually publishing an article full of according to sources familiar with the matter. That article didn't mention my name. He didn't even get my gender right. During the 4 U.S. stock market circuit breakers in 2020, my fund's net value grew by 310%. It wasn't luck. I had been building a macro hedging model since 2018, specifically designed for extreme market conditions. Over those 2 years, I woke up at 3 a.m. every day to watch the European market open, 5 a.m. to see the U.S. market close, wrote trading notes at 7 a.m., and held morning meetings with my team at 9 a.m. No one forced me to do this. I just felt that if an opportunity ever came, I didn't want to miss it because I wasn't ready. The opportunity has arrived. I am ready. In 2022, the Federal Reserve initiated an aggressive rate hike cycle, sending global capital markets into a state of despair. My fund achieved a 47% return that year, while the CSI 300 index fell by 21%. At the end of that year, a research director at a foreign institution wrote in an internal email, "Zhao Capital is the most consistently executed macro hedge strategy we have ever seen in China, bar none." That email was later leaked. I saw a screenshot of it in an encrypted chat group, read it, and then deleted it. There was no need to keep it. Performance itself is the best business card. In 2023, I shorted the dollar bonds of a certain real estate giant. That company was called Huayuan Real Estate, once a benchmark among private Chinese real estate developers. Its founder, Vincent, not his real name, but a nickname, had been on the cover of Forbes. Everyone was buying its bonds because of the high coupon rates, because it was too big to fail, and because no one had ever lost money shorting it in the past decade. I did it. Not because I was certain, but because my model had calculated it. 27 variables, from land reserve turnover rates to accounts payable aging, from local government land transfer revenues to the seasonal fluctuations of offshore renminbi liquidity. The model ran for a month and produced one conclusion: Huayuan Real Estate's cash flow would break within 9 months. I showed the conclusion to Malcolm. He read it 3 times and said, "Do you know what happens if you're wrong?" I knew. If I was wrong, our reputation would suffer, LPs would redeem, and the media would write us off as a bunch of self-righteous nerds. But what if I was right? I didn't say it out loud. But we both understood. We went short. 9 months later, Huayuan Real Estate defaulted on its dollar bonds. A profit of $1.4 billion. My father knew nothing of this. He still thought I was working as a foreign exchange trader, earning $35,000 a month, taking the subway, renting a place in Tongzhou. We haven't seen each other in 5 years. 5 years. 1,826 days. 43,824 hours. In those hours, I executed 47 trades worth over $1 billion each, established 3 licensed financial institutions, grew from a one-man operation with a laptop to a team of 31, and moved from a one-bedroom in Tongzhou to an entire floor in China World Tower Phase 3. He knew nothing. Not because he had no chance to find out. But because he never wanted to know. 5 years ago, at the coffee shop of the Westin Beijing Financial Street. That was the last normal conversation we ever had. He sat across from me, wearing a deep blue Zegna suit, the cufflinks made of pure gold, engraved with his initials. He had just come out of an investor meeting in a bad mood. Dingtai Capital's performance that year had fallen short of expectations, and 2 LPs had called to request redemptions. My mother sat beside me. She had taken the high-speed train from Shijiazhuang to Beijing specifically because my father wanted the family to have a meal together. That meal never happened. He had his assistant book a table at the Westin, but when we arrived, he said he didn't feel like Chinese food, so we went to the coffee shop instead. The coffee shop only had sandwiches and cold cuts. My mother ordered a fruit platter, ate 1 piece of cantaloupe, and never touched it again. My father drank 3 Americanos, each time only finishing half before setting it down and asking the waiter for a fresh one. What was he waiting for? For me to beg him. Before that day, I had already worked at Fitch Ratings for 2 years as a quantitative analyst. I wanted to strike out on my own, to start my own fund. I needed seed capital, not much, just 5 million would do. But I didn't want to borrow it from him, because I knew that if I did, it would mean he'd want equity, a seat on the board, and the right to tell me what to do at every quarterly meeting. My mother knew nothing of this. She just thought that family should spend more time together. My father finally spoke as he was drinking his 3rd cup of coffee. "Grace, how are things going at Fitch?" "Not bad." What does not bad mean? Exactly what it sounds like. He set down his coffee cup and leaned back in his chair, a posture I knew all too well. He was about to start lecturing. "Do you know how old I was when I founded Dingtai?" 31. That's right. 31. Just me, a desk, a phone, and 500,000 borrowed from relatives to get started. The first year, I made 1,200,000. The second year, 3 million. The third year, 10 million. I had heard this speech no less than 100 times. From childhood to adulthood. Every family gathering, every New Year, every time I brought home a decent report card, he would tell it. This story was his medal of honor, and also his weapon, a reminder to everyone that he had built everything from scratch, that he had fought his way up on his own, and that no one else had the right to stand on equal footing with him. "You're 31 now," he said. "What do you have?" I didn't answer. "You work as an analyst at a foreign firm. It sounds respectable, but tell me, where can you go in that job? Vice president? Managing director? Do you know who Fitch's biggest client in China is? It's Dingtai. I pay them over 2 million in rating fees every year. Do you think their boss would stand up when he sees me?" "Dad, I never expected you to stand up." "You haven't thought about it, but you should. You should think about how to surpass me. You should think about how to make the entire financial circle see you and think of Grace first, not Richard's daughter." I said, "I don't care what others think." He laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that said, "You're too naive. You don't care? You think this industry is something someone who doesn't care what others think can survive in? Grace, finance is a zero-sum game. Every penny you earn is someone else's loss. If you don't fight, you'll only be left with the scraps." I fell silent. Not because I agreed, but because I knew that in this kind of conversation, any rebuttal would be taken by him as proof of my immaturity. My mother said softly from the side, "Richard, Grace has her own thoughts. Don't push her." He shot a glance at my mother, a look I had seen countless times before. It wasn't the look of a husband toward his wife, it was the look of a boss toward an employee who had made a mistake but wasn't entirely hopeless. "Eleanor, you're just too soft on her." Then he turned to me and said those words. "Grace, with a personality like yours, you're simply not cut out for finance." His voice wasn't loud when he said it, but the cafe was quiet, and the two men in suits at the next table overheard. One of them recognized him, glanced over twice, then quickly looked away. "You don't have the killer instinct. You'll never make it to the top." I looked into his eyes. He didn't flinch. He never flinched. A man who had survived 30 years in the financial world had long since learned to maintain eye contact in any conversation. It was a weapon, a way of telling the other person, "I'm not afraid of you, I have nothing to hide, and every word I say is serious." He was serious too. He genuinely believed I wasn't capable. Not out of malice. It came from something deeper, more stubborn. He thought there was only one way to succeed in this world, and that was his way. And he had seen me work, seen me make decisions, seen how I reacted under pressure. In his eyes, I was too slow, too cautious, too unsociable, too bad at bonding over drinks and calling people brothers. He thought these were flaws. He didn't know that in an era dominated by algorithms and models, these were precisely strengths. He didn't know. I didn't tell him. I picked up the coffee that had already gone cold and took a sip. Black coffee, no sugar, no milk. I'd been drinking it this way since college, not because I liked the bitterness, but because I didn't want to rely on any external additives for anything. I set the cup down. "Dad, I'm planning to leave." "Come out?" "What do you mean?" "I want to start my own fund." He was taken aback. Then he laughed. This time it was a genuine laugh, but that kind of laugh was even more unbearable than before, because it wasn't mockery, it was pity. "Start a fund? You? What are you going to do it with?" "I have some savings, plus a small business loan." "How much?" "Over 2 million. He laughed again. "Over 2 million? Grace, do you know what the minimum threshold is for starting a private equity fund these days? 10 million. And that 10 million doesn't even cover operating costs. Office space, systems, compliance, personnel, custody, outsourcing, none of it comes cheap. What are you going to do with 2 million? It's not even enough to buy a Bloomberg terminal." He was telling the truth. I didn't argue. "Listen to me," he leaned forward slightly, his tone suddenly turning gentle, a gentleness more dangerous than his earlier lecturing, because it meant he was serious. "Come to Ding Tai. I'll give you a position as an investment manager, a team of your own, and let you manage a fund of 100 million. You've spent 2 years at Fitch learning models, at Ding Tai, you can put that to good use. Do well, and in 3 years, I'll promote you to director." He reached out and patted the back of my hand resting on the table. "You don't need to carve your own path. You're my daughter. Ding Tai will be yours one day." My mother nodded beside me. She wasn't agreeing with my father, she simply thought that having a stable job and someone to take care of you was better than going out and taking risks on your own. Her world was so small that it couldn't accommodate words like entrepreneurship, fund, or hundreds of millions in assets. Her world consisted only of classrooms, students, textbooks, and me. In her world, I would always be the most important person. That was enough. I gently pulled my hand out from under my father's. Dad, I want to try it on my own. The warmth on his face faded. Not into sudden anger, but slowly receding, like the tide pulling back. He leaned back in his chair, picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, and set it down again. Want to give it a try? Yeah. For how long? Not sure. And what if you can't figure it out? What are you going to do then? A man in his 30s, with failed startup on his resume, going back to look for a job? Then I'll look. Who would want you? That sentence was like a knife. Not that he meant to stab me with it. It just slipped out, unconsciously. In his world, losers have no value, and he didn't think I had what it takes not to be one. My mother's hand was under the table, holding my fingers. Her hand was rough, the chalk dust having worn away her fingerprints. That hand had held chalk for 30 years, graded homework for 30 years, and had never held anything of value. But it held me. I held back. Dad, no matter what, I have to try. He took his hand off the table and crossed his arms over his chest. Suit yourself. Then he placed 2,000 yuan on the table. For the bill. I have another meeting, I'll be going now. He stood up and buttoned his suit jacket, that gesture I knew all too well. Every time he was about to leave a room, no matter who was sitting in it, he would always button his jacket first. It was a ritual he had set for himself, telling himself, "You're leaving, but they won't forget you." He left. Without looking back. I sat there, drinking my coffee for another 5 minutes. My mother sat beside me, saying nothing. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. She never cried in front of me. "Mom, I'm sorry for putting you in an awkward position." She shook her head. "You shouldn't be saying sorry. What you should say is, 'Mom, I'm hungry, let's go eat.'" I smiled. "Mom, I'm hungry. Let's go eat." We went to the food court on the basement level of the Financial Street Shopping Center. I had a bowl of beef noodles, and she had a bowl of wontons. The two bowls together cost 48 yuan. My father had left that 2,000 yuan on the table, but I didn't take it. The waiter later chased after me and handed the money over. I took it and put it in my bag. That money later became part of the principal for my first trade. I don't know if he ever found out. But he never asked. That night, I flew 14 hours to Singapore. Not because I was angry. It was because I read a financial report on the plane. The company was called Huaxia Education Group, one of the largest private education institutions in China, listed in the United States. At its peak, its market value exceeded $20 billion, and its founder was known as China's education tycoon. The way I read that financial report was different from my father. He looked at revenue, profits, and growth rates. What I looked at were accounts receivable turnover days, the matching of advance receipts with deferred revenue, the fairness of related party transaction pricing, and the cash flow coverage of capital expenditures. These are the numbers hidden behind the numbers. They won't appear in press releases, investor presentations, or even financial report summaries. You have to read the footnotes line by line, compare the figures over time series one by one, to spot the anomaly. I found one. Huaxia Education's advance receipts, that is, tuition fees paid in advance by students, had grown by 400% over the past 3 years, while student enrollment had only increased by 80%. That means one thing: either they were recognizing revenue prematurely, or they were using advance receipts to mask the deterioration of operating cash flow. Either way, it means a 40 billion yuan hole. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the night sky. The moon was bright, with clouds below it, like a white sea. My father didn't know any of this. He didn't know that his heavy holding, Ding Tai Capital, held 8% of Huaxia Education's outstanding shares, making it one of the top 5 shareholders, was about to collapse. I could call and tell him. My fingers even swiped across my phone twice, finding his number. I didn't dial. Not out of spite. It was because, at that moment, I suddenly understood something. My father's judgment of me was itself his biggest risk exposure in the financial market. How could a man who couldn't even see his own daughter clearly ever see through a $40 billion lie? If he doesn't even understand me, how can he claim to understand the management of Huaxia education? How can he grasp the truth behind those meticulously polished financial reports? I didn't call him, not as a punishment. It was because I finally realized, everyone has their own lessons to learn. His lessons are not mine to help him with. 5 years later, Dingtai Capital was liquidated due to Huaxia education, incurring losses of over 1.2 billion renminbi. But that's a story for later. Now, back to the banquet at the Guomao Hotel. 327 people. I was seated at table 1, not the head table, but a 10-person round table diagonally behind it. I chose the seat myself. The organizers asked where I wanted to sit, and I said, anywhere. They placed me at table 1 because the guest list for that table included Beijing Zhaohao Management Consulting Company, Limited, and that company's tax payments over the past 3 years ranked in the top 100 of Xiqing District. They don't know who's behind Zhaohao Management Consulting. They don't need to. The seat next to me was occupied by a young man in his early 30s, wearing a Seville Row ready-to-wear suit, not bespoke, but already better than 90% of the people in the room. His cuffs had no cufflinks, just ordinary button shirt. On his wrist was an Omega Seamaster steel bracelet, worth over 30,000 yuan. People in finance look at watches the way hunters read tracks. Not to show off, but to quickly categorize. An Omega Seamaster means, he's not in the top tier, but he knows what a good watch is, just hasn't reached the point of buying a Rolex yet, or doesn't care to. He introduced himself as Dominic. He works as an investment manager at a family office. He didn't mention the name of the family office, and I didn't ask. He said he manages about 1.5 billion in funds. What strategy? I asked. Multi-strategy. Primarily long equity, with some CTA. What's the yield? 12% last year. I nodded. In this market environment, 12% was slightly above average. He asked me what I did. I said, a bit of investing. What sector? Sees everything. He smiled and didn't press further. People in finance don't push when you dodge a question. They make a mental note of it and look it up later. If they can't find anything, they assume you're a nobody and cross you off the worth-watching list. Dominic will look me up. I have a feeling about it. Not because he's rude, quite the opposite, because he's polite. Someone who's polite to everyone is usually the same person who runs a background check on everyone. My father stood at the center of the head table. 62 years old. His hair dyed jet black, not out of vanity, but professional necessity. In finance, gray hair means veteran, but a full head of it means outdated. He needed veteran, not outdated, so his colorist came every 3 weeks to touch up the roots. His suit was a chiton, handmade in Italy, starting at 80,000 yuan a set. He had 3, and he rotated wearing them. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe Complications series, model 5396, with an annual calendar and moon phase. He bought this watch in 2021, the year Dingtai had its best performance, spending over 600,000 yuan. He called it a little reward for myself. He spoke in a very loud voice. Not deliberately loud. It was the kind of booming voice of someone used to being the center of attention. He didn't need a microphone, his voice could cover a radius of 15 meters. So I say, when it comes to investing, courage comes first. When I started my first fund, I didn't even have a proper office. The office was a room in the Friendship Hotel, the desk was bought from a second-hand market, and there were only 2 chairs. When guests came, I had to borrow from next door. But I dared to make decisions, dared to take risks, dared to enter the market when others didn't. He paused, scanning the room. It was a carefully timed pause. He was waiting for applause, or at least a nod. The applause came, sparse, but enough to satisfy him. What about the young people today? They study a bunch of models, crunch a bunch of numbers, and still don't dare to invest in a decent project. Take my daughter, for instance. He raised his glass. She studied finance for 7 years, and now she's still working for someone else. After paying rent each month, she can't even afford a decent handbag. Someone laughed. That awkward, obligatory kind of laughter. About a third of the people laughed. Another third kept their heads down, eating. The last third pretended not to hear. I took a sip of water. The glass held Evian, not sparkling water. I have nothing against sparkling water, but the sparkling water at banquets is usually Perrier, and Perrier's bubbles are too sharp, affecting the palate's perception of food. That sounds pretentious, but it's really just the last shred of ritual left in someone who has eaten too many takeout meals alone in the dead of night. Dominic glanced at me. A very brief look. He didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered on my face for a fraction of a second, just a little longer than when my father told that joke. He was observing. I set down my glass and continued listening. Malcolm messaged from backstage. 2 people from our team were on duty tonight, and Malcolm was personally watching from the monitoring room. Not because he had to be there, but because he knew what was going to happen tonight, and he wanted to be present. The message was brief: the feed has been cut. But at least 40 people have already heard that line. Someone is recording it on their phone. I replied with a single word, okay. Then I turned my phone screen down on the table. No need to panic. The recordings won't leak. It's not that I'm going to tamper with them or delete them, it's that no one who dares to record in this room would be stupid enough to make those recordings public. Secrets in the financial world have never been kept by gag orders. What keeps them is always self-interest. Everyone knows that leaking someone else's secret is the same as telling the world that you yourself are untrustworthy. In this business, an untrustworthy person doesn't last 3 years. My father has already gone through 7 personal assistants. It's an open secret in the circle. I looked toward the main table. My father was clinking glasses with his old friends. Seated to his right was the vice president of Kofco Trust, and to his left was the general manager of the investment banking department of Minsheng Bank. These were 2 connections he had spent 10 years cultivating. Every spring festival, he would personally call their secretaries to schedule a meeting, bringing modest but thoughtful gifts, not bribes, but gestures of goodwill. What he didn't know was that, over the past 2 years, subordinates of these 2 men had separately approached Zhao Capital seeking collaboration. Michael, the assistant general manager of Minsheng Bank's investment banking department, arranged a dinner with me through an intermediary. I turned it down. Not because I'm self-righteous. It's because I know that Minsheng Bank's way of doing things doesn't align with mine. They favor big, while I favor right. Neither approach is inherently superior, but mixing them would lead to trouble. I didn't tell my father any of this. He didn't need to know. The dinner party progressed to the first course. The appetizer was raw oysters on crushed ice, paired with osmanthus vinegar jelly and lime foam. The oysters were French Guillardeau, not the largest size, but fresh enough. The cutlery was silver, quite heavy, with the China World Hotel logo engraved on the edges. At occasions like this, the oysters are always Guillardeau, just as the red wine is always Lafite. Not because they are the best, but because everyone present knows their names. In the finance circle, the names you know matter more than the facts you know. Dominic ate the oysters in a very standard way: squeeze a little lemon, pick up the shell with the meat, and swallow it in one go. No sauce, no hesitation, no unnecessary movements. This told me 2 things. First, he had eaten oysters many times and knew how to eat them. Second, he didn't belong to the class that would worry about whether his table manners were elegant enough. Truly wealthy people don't care how others perceive them when they eat. I ate oysters while listening to the conversation at the table. Sitting to my left was a man in his 50s, Mr. Zhao, a senior executive at a listed company. He was chatting with the person next to him about regulatory policy changes in mergers and acquisitions, his tone carrying a smugness that said, "I have inside information." Across from me sat a woman in her 30s, impeccably made up, wearing a Chanel jacket. She was discussing with the person beside her about applying for international schools for her child. "We applied to Keystone Academy, the interview is scheduled for May. I heard the acceptance rate is only 15%. Little did she know, one of the board members of Keystone Academy had reached out to me last year, asking if I was interested in setting up a special fund focused on education. I wasn't interested. But I didn't tell her that. Because saying something like that would only make the situation awkward, with no real point to it. Malcolm walked over from backstage just as the dinner was reaching the second course. The second course was matsutake soup, served in small white porcelain cups, with a thin slice of ham resting on the lid. The soup tasted fine, but the matsutake was out of season. March matsutake is either frozen or the so-called fake matsutake from Yunnan. For such a detail to appear at a dinner of this caliber suggested that the organizers had cut costs on ingredient procurement. That in itself was a signal. This year's private equity annual conference had a tighter budget than last year's. Malcolm wore a dark gray suit, no tie. He was 2 years older than me, a classmate from Columbia University. We were in the same program, lived in the same dormitory building, and pulled countless all-nighters in the same study room. After graduation, he went to Goldman Sachs, and I went to Fitch. 3 years later, he quit to start a business with me. He studied computer science, specializing in the architecture design of high-frequency trading systems. Our collaboration was simple, I handled the strategy, and he handled the system. I told him, we need to short this, and he told me, the system can handle the scale. Our trust was built on thousands of such conversations, no written agreements, no notarized documents for equity holdings. Just a simple partnership agreement, signed on the coffee table in that rented house in Tongzhou. I used a ballpoint pen, he used a fountain pen. That piece of paper is now locked in the company's safe, next to our very first statement. Malcolm leaned down and whispered 2 sentences in my ear. The first, the CFO of Dingtai just went to the restroom to take a call. The second, there might be a change in the credit line situation tonight. I nodded. Malcolm straightened up, glanced around the banquet hall, then turned and walked away. His pace was neither fast nor slow, much like his coding style, steady, efficient, leaving no trace. Dominic noticed. Someone from your company? A colleague. He doesn't seem like an ordinary colleague. He's my business partner. Dominic didn't ask further. But his hand slid under the table to touch his phone. Not to pick it up and look at it, but to confirm with his fingers that the phone was still in his pocket. It was an instinctive reaction when hearing unexpected information, confirming the existence of a communication tool. He began to look at me with fresh eyes. It was a gaze unique to an investment manager. Like reading a financial report, line by line, tracing from one number to another, cross-referencing from one footnote to the next. He wanted to break down the me into quantifiable factors: age, educational background, career history, manner of speech, attire, accessories, body language. I let him look. Because I knew he wouldn't find anything. I'm wearing a black dress from the row, no logo, no obvious design language. To the average person, it's just a plain black dress. But in the eyes of someone at Dominic's level, the row means, she knows what's good, but she doesn't need you to confirm it. The watch is a Cartier Tank, steel band, the basic model. I bought it with my year-end bonus from my first year at Fitch. Not to show off, I keep it hidden under my cuff. I bought it so that every time I look down to check the time, I remember one thing: I earned this. No one gave it to me. The bracelet was a gift from my mother. Sterling silver, very thin, no engraving. It sits on my left wrist, side by side with the Cartier. Silver and steel, similar in color, but different in texture. If you don't look closely, you might think it's just a bracelet and a watch. If you do look closely, you'll realize these two things represent two different kinds of success, one you earned for yourself, and one you were given. Dominic didn't look at my wrist. He looked at my hand. Not at the ring, I wasn't wearing one. He looked at my nails. Short, clean, no polish. These were hands that worked. He withdrew his gaze, picked up his glass, and took a sip. It wasn't wine. It was sparkling water. Just like mine. The main course arrived. Pan-seared Chilean sea bass with black truffle sauce. The sea bass was Antarctic toothfish, rich in fat, delicate in texture. The black truffle sauce used Italian winter black truffles, its intense flavor overwhelming the taste of the fish itself. A small failure, good ingredients don't need to be masked. But I finished it anyway. Because not eating would be a waste. My father stood up. The way he rose was ritualistic. First, he folded his napkin and placed it on the table, then, he pushed his chair back about 30 centimeters, making sure it wouldn't hit the table edge when he stood. Finally, he smoothed the hem of his suit jacket with both hands, confirming every button was fastened. Then he raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen." His voice echoed through the banquet hall. Not because he was using a microphone, he wasn't. It was because the room's acoustic design was itself intended to carry the sound from the head table to every corner. In the banquet hall of the Guamau Hotel, every detail had been meticulously calculated, including the path of sound propagation. "Thank you all for being here tonight." He paused. 20 years. Ding Tai Capital has been established for 20 years. 20 years ago today, I sat in a guest room at the Friendship Hotel, using a folding table as my desk, a pager as my communication tool, and a copy of Securities Investment bought from the Wangfujing bookstore as my textbook. This was yet another opening line rehearsed countless times. Every number, every detail was precise enough to be used as evidence. But those who truly knew the old days understood that the guest room at the Friendship Hotel was actually Ding Tai's first registered address, and that folding table was borrowed from the room next door and returned the next day. But these details didn't matter. A story doesn't need to be entirely true, it only needs to be believable. Today, Ding Tai Capital manages over 8 billion in assets, with a professional team of 40 people and offices in Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen. He swept his gaze across the entire room. But that's not important. When he said not important, his tone made it sound like he was talking about something monumental. That was his technique: first give a specific number, then say not important, letting the audience fill in something bigger than the number on their own. What matters is how we got to where we are today. He began to tell his story. It started with him quitting his government job, then securing his first round of startup capital, making his first heavy bet, facing his first liquidation crisis, and achieving his first 8-figure profit. At every turning point, there was an adversary, a benefactor, and a choice. He was good at this. In any setting, he could make people believe within 3 minutes that he was a man with a story. But tell too many stories, and they become a script. I've been listening to his script for 30 years. So I say, when it comes to investing, the most important thing isn't IQ, isn't education, isn't resources, it's guts. His gaze swept across the room. It's daring to enter when others dare not. He began calling out names. George, do you remember 2008? During the financial crisis, everyone ran. Did you run? You did. But I didn't. I added to my position. The George he called out raised his glass with a smile, but didn't respond. William, during the 2015 stock market crash, did you liquidate your positions? You did. I didn't run either. I held on. Leonard, oh, Leonard isn't here today. Leonard ran that year, and after he ran, he never came back. He laughed. The sound of his laughter bounced around the banquet hall. A third of the people laughed along. Another third lowered their heads. The last third remained expressionless. I didn't know which third I belonged to. But I'm not here to brag today. As he said this, his tone suddenly shifted, becoming solemn. Like someone who abruptly stops smiling after telling a joke. This in itself is a technique, a way to signal to the audience, what I'm about to say next is serious. What I mean to say is, our generation, we started from nothing, fought our way up. The hardships we endured, the suffering we went through, young people today can't even imagine it. But what about the young people of today? He shook his head. The gesture was subtle, but enough for the entire room to see. They've learned a bunch of models, crunched a pile of numbers, and think finance is just tapping away on Excel. Ask them to negotiate a deal, they won't dare. Ask them to meet a client, they can't. Ask them to hold a position in a bear market, they're the first to run. He took a sip of his drink. I'm talking about my daughter. The room fell silent. Dominic's hand froze beside his wine glass. Grace, my daughter, 7 years studying finance, a master's from Columbia University, an analyst at Fitch Ratings. Sounds impressive to you, doesn't it? Someone nodded. But now she's 31, oh no, 32, and still working for someone else. After paying rent each month, she can't even afford a decent handbag. He chuckled. She's been like that since she was a kid. Good grades, but no social savvy. She'd ace the exams, but when it came to the real deal, she'd chicken out. I told her, come to Ding Tai, I'll give you a team, and you'll manage 100 million. She said she wanted to start her own business. I asked, what are you going to start it with? She said she had savings. I asked how much. She said it wasn't convenient to tell me. He was looking in my direction, but not at me, at some point behind me. His gaze passed over the top of my head and landed on a decorative painting on the back wall of the banquet hall. Not convenient to say. Heh heh. She's too embarrassed to say. Because with her savings, she can't even afford a bathroom in Beijing. The laughter grew louder. This time it wasn't a third, it was at least half. Dominic wasn't laughing. He was looking at me. I held my glass of water, but didn't drink. So what I'm saying is, my father raised his glass, addressing the entire room. When raising a child, you can't just let her study. You have to let her experience things. You have to let her know how the world works. You have to let her know. He didn't finish. Because the screen cut out. Not that he stopped speaking, the 3 giant LED screens behind him went black all at once. Not the black of a shutdown, but the black of a signal loss. A line of small white text appeared on the screens, signal source lost, reconnecting. A murmur rippled through the banquet hall. But it was quiet, because my father was still speaking, and his voice was loud enough to drown out the whispers. You have to let her know that no matter how many books you've read, without courage, you can't accomplish anything. He set down his glass. The toast was over. He sat down. Before sitting, he glanced at the screen on the back wall. The same line was still displayed, signal source lost, reconnecting. His brow furrowed for a moment, then quickly relaxed. This sort of thing happened occasionally at banquets. A technical glitch. No one would take it seriously. Except me. And Malcolm. And Julian, seated at table 3. Julian glanced at me. The look was brief, less than a second. Then he lowered his head to look at his phone. The light from the phone screen reflected on his face, illuminating a faint surgical scar on his chin, a remnant from the thyroid surgery he had 3 years ago. He didn't lift his head. But I saw the corner of his mouth twitch slightly upward. It wasn't a smile. It was confirmation. A signal of acknowledgement. The dessert arrived. A dark chocolate tart, adorned with edible gold leaf. The gold leaf was as thin as a cicada's wing, quivering faintly in the candlelight. The dark chocolate was Valrhona, more bitter than sweet, the kind of flavor adults prefer. A small scoop of vanilla ice cream and a few raspberries were placed on the side. The plating was delicate, but the combination felt a bit odd, a hot chocolate tart paired with cold ice cream, the contrast in temperature and texture too stark, as if two chefs had each prepared their own part and then forced them together. Dominic went to the restroom. When he came back, his expression had changed. Not pale, not flushed, it was the look of someone who had just realized they had been underestimating another person. His pupils dilated slightly, his lips pressed together, and the rhythm of his breathing shifted. He sat down, turned sideways, and lowered his voice. "Your Grace? Who told you that?" Someone was on the phone in the restroom. "They said Grace from Zhao Capital is here tonight. Said she's the most important guest tonight. Said the executives from Huaxin Bank are waiting for her." As he said this, his speech was about 20% faster than before. That was a sign of his adrenaline kicking in. I took a sip of water. "And then?" "Then I searched for your name." He paused. "Nothing came up." "Right. But I found Zhao Capital." He looked at me with the kind of expression someone has when they suddenly realize the creature sitting beside them isn't a cat, but a basking leopard. 300 billion under management? Roughly. He didn't ask, "Really?" Because at this level, no one asks, "Really?" You only need to observe the other person's reaction. If I were lying, my eyes would blink more often, my hands would make unnecessary movements, and my voice would unconsciously rise. I showed none of that. He could tell. "Your dad doesn't know?" I didn't answer. He understood. He raised his glass and took a large gulp. It wasn't a sip, it was a chug. The wine's red color slid rapidly down the glass wall, like mercury in a thermometer. Then he set the glass down. "I won't say a word." "I know." "How do you know?" "Because you're a smart man. Smart people know that saying certain things won't do them any good." He didn't deny it. He picked up his glass again, this time drinking more slowly. He was giving himself time to digest what he had just heard. A person managing 30 billion in assets, 20 times the scale of his own portfolio, was sitting right next to him, wearing a plain black dress with no logo, using the same tableware as everyone else, eating the same dessert. And that person's father, just 3 minutes ago, had said in front of over 300 people that she couldn't even afford a decent handbag. He needed the alcohol to help his brain process this paradox. I didn't interrupt him. I finished my chocolate tart. The raspberries were a bit sour, but they balanced the bitterness of the chocolate just right. The ice cream had already started to melt, pooling into a milky little puddle on the plate. I like the texture of melted ice cream. Softer, creamier, like melting snow. The coffee arrived. An espresso, served in a white demitasse cup, with a small Italian almond biscuit on the side. The crema was thick, a sign that the beans were fresh. The aroma was that of a dark roast, with hints of caramel and dark chocolate. Not top tier, but thoughtful for the occasion. I picked up the cup, blew gently across the crema, and took a small sip. My father stood up. It was the third time that evening, and the last. The first 2 times were for toasts and speeches. This time, it was for closing remarks. The next 20 years of Dingtai Capital will be even more brilliant. We will continue to deepen our presence in the Chinese market, continue to create value for our investors, and continue to nurture the next generation of talent in China's financial industry. He glanced at the script in his hand, an A4 sheet, folded in half, with a few key words written on it in marker. He didn't actually need the script, he had said these words too many times. The script was just a prop, a way to tell the audience, I am serious, I am prepared. I believe that everyone present here is a witness. He raised his glass. To the next 20 years of Dingtai. He waited for everyone to raise their glasses. Most of them did. I didn't. Not because I didn't want to toast. It was because what I held in my hand was a coffee cup, not a wine glass. I was waiting for the coffee to finish. My father saw it. Not that I hadn't raised my glass, his eyesight wasn't that good. What he saw was Julian standing up. Not from table 3. From table 1. My father's table. When Julian stood up, his chair slid back about 20 centimeters, the casters barely making a sound on the carpet. He straightened up, adjusted his suit collar, then placed his hands in front of him, fingers interlaced. The movements were slow. Every single one seemed to play out in slow motion. The noise in the banquet hall gradually died down. From a low hum, to hushed whispers, to complete silence. Julian was the general manager of the investment banking department at Huaxin Bank's Beijing branch. His title carried less weight than his actual power. Real power didn't lie in titles, but in the seats of the credit approval committee. He was one of the committee members, and the kind with voting rights. Huaxin Bank had granted Dingtai Capital a credit line of 800 million yuan. 800 million, that accounted for 60% of all Dingtai's bank loans. If Huaxin called in the loan, Dingtai's liquidity would run into trouble within a month. Everyone knew this. Including my father. Including Caroline. Including Derek. Including Dominic. Including the person on the phone in the restroom. Julian spoke. Mr. Richard. He called my father by his first name. Not Miss Grace, not Chairman Chen, but Mr. Richard. In the formal settings of the financial world, addressing someone by their first name meant 3 things. First, what was about to be said was important. Second, it was not up for discussion. Third, the speaker was not afraid of offending the other party. Richard's hand, holding the wine glass, froze midair. Mr. Julian? What is this? Julian didn't respond to him. He turned around. Facing me. The gaze of the entire banquet hall followed him. 326 pairs of eyes. No, 327. Including Julian himself, 327. All fixed on me. I set down my coffee cup. The sound of the cup meeting the saucer, in this utterly silent room, sounded like a sigh. But my movements were slow. The bottom of the cup touched the saucer first, then the body, then the handle. 3 points of contact, compressed into a single second. I had practiced this. Miss Grace, Julian called out to me. Not a direct Grace, not this lady, and certainly not the representative of Showa Management Consulting, but precisely Miss Grace. This form of address fell into the quiet room as if it had triggered a subtle chemical reaction. I heard someone gasp sharply, heard someone abruptly stop their movement, the metallic clink of a dinner knife against a porcelain plate, crisp and piercing, like a suppressed little shriek. I also heard someone lower their voice, leaning close to the person beside them to ask, "Who is she?" Dominic remained seated, unmoving. He had known my identity all along, yet even so, he subtly shifted his body slightly away from me. This was neither aversion nor fear, but a form of respect. He wanted to give me enough space. Thank you for gracing us with your presence tonight. Julian said this with a slight dip of his head, not a bow, just a nod. In the financial world, the angle of a nod is inversely proportional to your status. The higher your position, the less you lower your head. The nod Julian gave me was at an angle of about 10 degrees. That was the angle he used for someone of equal standing. I nodded back. My angle was also 10 degrees. You're too kind, Mr. Julian. Julian straightened up and looked at my father. He was ready to get down to business. Mr. Richard, Huaxin Bank has approved the credit line for Dingtai Capital. The expression on my father's face underwent a rapid reconstruction. First came tension, his brows unconsciously tightening. Then came release. Upon hearing the words "has been approved," his lips parted slightly, as if about to smile. Then came confusion, the title Mr. Richard still lingered. He was waiting for the rest. Because Julian had said "has been approved." But he hadn't said congratulations. In the financial world, between approved and congratulations lies an entire universe. If everything had gone smoothly, Julian would have said, "Approved, congratulations." If there were any strings attached, he would have said, "Approved, but..." What Julian said was, Huaxin Bank has approved the credit line for Dingtai Capital. Period. Pause. Then he continued, but, Miss Grace. He turned to me again. I mean Miss Grace. He gestured toward me with his eyes. The commission income generated last year by Miss Grace's prime brokerage account at Huaxin Bank was 9 times the total interest income from Dingtai Capital's entire credit line. He paused, letting the number settle in the air. 9 times. Not 2 times, not 3 times, 9 times. I heard someone start doing the math in a low voice. Dingtai's interest income, multiplied by 9, then divided by Huaxin's commission rate, could roughly estimate the trading volume of Zhao Capital at Huaxin. The estimate came out to, at least 200 billion. A transaction volume of 200 billion. A 31-year-old woman. Wearing a little black dress. Sitting in the corner of table 1. Drinking a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Julian didn't give them time to keep calculating. So, Mr. Richard, the person you should be toasting tonight isn't your partners, not your investors, not your bankers. He looked at my father. It's your daughter. Silence. Not the kind of silence where there's nothing to say. The kind of silence where everyone is waiting for one person to speak, but that person doesn't know what to say. I heard the kitchen door open and close. Someone was peeking. I heard the central air conditioning vent humming overhead. I heard someone set down a glass, the bottom meeting the tablecloth with a dull thud. My father's face shifted from red to white, from white to blue, and from blue back to white. This process lasted about 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, the corner of his mouth twitched 3 times. Each time it seemed like he was about to speak, but each time he swallowed the words back down. Finally, he spoke. Impossible. His voice wasn't loud. But in the silence, everyone could hear it. The weight of those 3 words lay not in their meaning, but in the person who spoke them. Richard, the founder of Dingtai Capital, had been in the industry for 30 years, weathered 4 bull and bear cycles, and seen countless lies and scams. He never said impossible without evidence. But he said it. Because what he faced was not a fact that could be analyzed. What he faced was the collapse of a worldview he had built over 30 years. In his world, his daughter was an ordinary person who got good grades but didn't know how to network, a failure who couldn't even afford a decent bag, a pitiful soul who needed him to save her. Now someone was telling him that this pitiful soul was his banker's most important client, the invisible guarantor of his credit line, and the one person among the 327 attendees who needed his help the least. His brain refused to accept the information. Not because the information was false. But because if it were true, then everything from the past 30 years, his judgment, his authority, his identity as a father, would become a joke. Caroline, my stepmother, began to speak. Mr. Julian, are you mistaken? How could Grace possibly? Her voice was shrill, like fingernails scraping across a chalkboard. Not because she didn't believe it, but because she believed it too much. She believed it, and so she panicked. Julian didn't look at her. He looked at my father. Mr. Richard, your daughter has 3 companies under her name. Zhao Capital is one of them, and the largest. The other 2 are Zhao Management Consulting and Zhao Yuan Investment. The ultimate controlling party behind all 3 companies is Grace. According to the latest custodian report, Zhao Capital's assets under management amount to 31 billion. When he said 31 billion, his tone was no different from reciting an ordinary contract clause. Dingtai Capital's assets under management, according to the financial report you submitted to Huaxin last week, amount to 15.8 billion. He paused. Your daughter, Grace, manages twice the capital you do. Her office is in China World Tower Phase 3, on the 36th floor. Right above yours. Every day you take the elevator to work, and when you pass the 36th floor. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Because the ending of that sentence, everyone present could fill in for themselves. She works on the floor above you every day, and you never knew. She watches you come and go from the building, but you never see her. You're only one floor apart, yet what separates you is the entire reality of the financial world. My father's hand began to tremble. Not the kind of subtle, controlled quiver, but an uncontrollable tremor rising from deep within the muscles. The hand holding the wine glass, hovering about 40 centimeters above the table, started to shake, slightly, yet visibly. The wine left streaks on the glass. Ring after ring, like the growth rings of a tree. The last time you saw her was 5 years ago. You said she wasn't cut out for finance. You said she'd never amount to anything. You said she'd never make it. Julian's voice was not loud, but every word struck like a hammer driving nails, one by one, into the mahogany table draped with a white cloth. By the time you say these words, she had already made her first billion-dollar deal. Her first pot of gold, he looked at me. Miss Grace, her first pot of gold came from shorting the stock you had heavily invested in. My father abruptly lifted his head. Huasha Education. Julian spoke the name. A sharp intake of breath filled the room. Huasha Education. The name that collapsed in 2022, leaving countless investors with nothing. The name that cost Dingtai Capital $1.2 billion, nearly triggering a bank loan recall. The name Richard had called the biggest mistake of my career in countless investor meetings. Before that stock crashed, the largest short position in the market came from an account called Zhao Capital. Julian looked at me. Miss Grace, was it you? 326 people were waiting for my answer. I picked up my coffee cup. The coffee had gone cold. When an espresso goes cold, the bitterness becomes sharper, the sourness more pronounced, and the original aroma fades, leaving only a taste reminiscent of Chinese medicine. But I still took a sip. Then I set the cup down. It was me. 2 words. I heard someone start to clap. Not the kind of enthusiastic, crowd-wide applause. It was the kind where 1 or 2 people instinctively clapped a couple of times, then realized the occasion was inappropriate and quickly stopped, a brief and awkward noise. The applause lasted less than a second. Then came silence again. My father's hand finally lost its steadiness. The wine glass slipped from his grasp. It didn't fall to the floor, it tipped over on the table. The rim faced downward, and the wine poured out from the opening, spreading across the white tablecloth like a slowly unfurling red map. Caroline let out a scream. It was very soft, but in that utterly silent room, the scream was amplified tenfold. She wiped at it with her napkin. The red wine stained her fingers, then seeped onto her diamond ring. She stared at her hand as if it were something that didn't belong to her. The diamond gleamed with an eerie light, steeped in the wine. Derek, my stepbrother, stood up from table 5. 32 years old. Dartmouth graduate. Vice president at Dingtai Capital. The title was given by our father. The clients were handed down by our father. The signing authority was authorized by our father. His only irreplaceable value at Dingtai was his surname. He walked toward me. With every step, the expression on his face shifted. From confusion, why is everyone looking at that woman? To shock, what Julian said is true. To anger, what gives her the right? He stood before me. He was about 15 centimeters taller than me. He tried to use this height difference to create a sense of pressure. He straightened his back, lifted his chin slightly, and looked down at me. What gives you the right? His voice was hoarse, like sandpaper scraping against metal. What gives you the right? Dingtai was founded by Dad. 20 years. You've done nothing. You haven't spent a single day at the company. You haven't pulled a single all-nighter. You haven't had a single drink with a client. What gives you the right to come here and cause trouble? I looked at him. His eyes were bloodshot, too much to drink. His tie was loose, his right hand had been tugging at it. The buttons of his suit jacket were undone, they had popped open when he sat down. A 32-year-old man, wearing his finest suit, sitting in a seat arranged by his father, drinking his father's wine, defending his father's company. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't even know what he was angry about. I asked him, Derek, what was your salary plus bonus last year at Ding Tai? He was stunned for a moment. 3,200,000. Before tax. How much did Ding Tai lose last year? 80 million. Not about Ding Tai. About you. How much are you worth? He didn't answer. Derek, you've never pulled an all-nighter. Because the place you live is only 10 minutes from the office, and Dad bought that house for you. You've never had a drink with a client, because Dad said, young people don't need to entertain. You've never closed a deal on your own, because every single contract you sign has to go through Dad's approval. My voice wasn't loud. But in this room, every word fell like a pin dropping to the floor. You've been at Ding Tai for 10 years. 10 years. And you haven't learned a thing, except how to sit in your father's shadow. His face flushed crimson. Starting from his neck, it spread upward, to his jaw, his cheeks, his ears. The red surged like a tide, swallowing him whole. You're just jealous. Jealous of what? You're jealous of me. He couldn't finish the sentence. Because he couldn't find a single thing I might envy him for. Wealth? Mine had an extra zero. Status? My name appeared on Bloomberg terminals, his only showed up in Ding Tai's internal directory. Freedom? He couldn't even decide whether to go to work tomorrow without checking his father's mood. And the one thing he had, that surname, I had it too. Even more legitimately than he did. He stood there with his mouth open, like a fish yanked out of water. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide, but unfocused. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but there was no strength to swing them. Dominic shifted his chair a little farther away from him. Just a few centimeters. But enough for Derek to notice. He did notice. He turned to Dominic. What the fuck are you looking at? Dominic didn't answer. He picked up his glass and took a sip of water. Derek's face grew even redder. He turned and walked toward the entrance of the banquet hall. After 3 steps, he stopped. Looked back at me. Then walked on. His figure disappeared behind the doors of the hall. No one called him back. Caroline began to cry. Not a real cry. It was the kind of crying she had practiced for 20 years. Dabbing the corner of her napkin at the corner of her eye, not wiping away tears, but preparing to wipe away tears. Her voice was just loud enough for the 3 surrounding tables to hear. The content could just barely be interpreted as a wounded mother speaking on behalf of her husband. It's so unfair, she said. Richard has always been good to Grace. She was the one who didn't want to come home. She was the one who chose to leave. We've been waiting for her, waiting for 5 years. She looked at me as she spoke. She was waiting for me to argue. She wanted me to argue. Because as long as I open my mouth, she can drag the conversation into the quagmire of family conflict. She can interpret my rebuttal as the daughter is too stubborn and her own silence as it's too hard being a stepmother. She would say, we've always treated her like our own daughter, then wait for me to retort, no, you haven't, and then say, see, she just refuses to accept us. This is a script she has been performing for 20 years. Every character knows their lines. I'm not going to play along. I wait for her to finish. She finishes. She picks up her coffee cup and finds it empty. She lifts it, tilts the rim, and nothing flows out. She puts it back down. As she sets it down, the cup and saucer clink, producing a crisp sound. In this room, the clink of a cup and saucer is equivalent to a flare. She has lost her composure. She picked up an empty cup. A woman who has navigated the social scene for 20 years would not pick up an empty cup, unless her mind is unsettled. Her mind is unsettled. Because every word Julian said was dismantling the world she had spent 20 years building for herself. In that world, she was Richard's wife, the first lady of Ding Tai Capital, the supportive partner who helped her husband build a business from scratch. But the truth was, when she married Richard, Ding Tai had already been running for 5 years, with assets exceeding 1 billion. She hadn't started from nothing. She had simply parachuted into an empire already built. And now, she realized that this empire, in the presence of another woman, in my presence, was like a house made of paper. She cried. Not out of sadness, but out of fear. My father finally spoke. Grace. He called my name. His voice was hoarse, like someone who hadn't had water in a long time. Is that why you came tonight? Why what? To embarrass me. No. Then why are you here? I looked into his eyes. Those eyes I had been looking into for 32 years. When I was a child, those eyes would light up when I got a perfect score. They would narrow when I played the piano. They would turn cold when I made a mistake. Later, those eyes began to grow hazy, as if shrouded in a layer of mist. When he looked at me, it was no longer at a real person, but at a concept, my daughter. What my daughter should be, what my daughter shouldn't be, how my daughter had let him down. He was looking at the concept, not the person. Julian invited me to a business dinner. It wasn't until I saw the program that I realized it was your event. He said nothing. 5 years ago, you said I had no drive. You said I'd never make it. You said I couldn't even afford a decent bag. I placed my handbag on the table. Black calfskin. Understated, no logo. This bag is a Hermes Constance. Not a limited edition, but it still costs over 80,000. When I bought it, I made the decision in 3 seconds, because 80,000 means no more to me than 380. His hands trembled on the table. But I don't care about this bag. What I care about is, you've never really looked at me. What you see is the Grace you've imagined. A failure who only knows how to study, has no courage, and needs you to whip her forward. I stood up. I don't hate you. When I said this, my voice didn't tremble. I don't hate you, because hating someone means you still care about their opinion. And I stopped caring 5 years ago. I just don't need you anymore. I picked up my clutch. Small, black, with only my phone, power bank, ID card, and a lipstick I'd used for 3 years inside. I turned and walked toward the door. Flat shoes. On the thick carpet, they made almost no sound. I didn't look back. There was no need. From the moment I stood up, this room was no longer my stage. My stage was on the 36th floor. Every morning at 5:30, I sat alone in my office, the screen in front of me flickering with numbers from global markets. Back then, there was no applause, no spotlight, no one knew how much money I was making. But I knew. And that was enough. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I heard someone calling my name from behind. It wasn't my father's voice. It was Dominic's. He had chased me out of the banquet hall, standing in the corridor, his hand raised as if to press the elevator button, then he lowered it. He didn't press it. He knew it wouldn't have made a difference. The elevator descends. I'm alone. From the 80th floor to the first. The numbers flicker on the screen. 79. 78. 77. I pull out my phone. Send a message to Malcolm, encrypt and archive the surveillance footage from the monitoring room before tonight. Sent. 76. 75. 74. Send a message to my mother, Mom, it's done. 3 seconds later, she replied with a single word, "Mm." Not "are you okay," not "what did he say," not "are you hurt." Just one word. "Mm." That's my mother. A Chinese language teacher for 30 years. She knows when to speak and when not to. Now is the time not to speak. She understands me. She knows I don't need comfort tonight. What I need is silence. The elevator reached the first floor. The door opened. The lobby was empty. The doorman held the glass door for me. "Take care, Miss Grace." I nodded and walked out of the China World Hotel. Beijing's night, the March wind still carried a chill. Traffic on Chang'an Avenue was sparse, and streetlights lit up one after another, stretching into the unseen distance. I didn't call for a car. I wanted to take a walk. Past the Guomao Bridge, past Dawang Road, past the Huamao Center. With every step, a frame of tonight's scenes replayed in my mind. My father's trembling hands. Caroline's empty cup. Derek's flushed face. Dominic's chair sliding a few centimeters across the carpet. Julian's precise 10-degree nod, measured to the millimeter. The silence of 326 people. All stored in my phone. Not as notes. As reminders. Reminders to myself, never let anyone define who you are. At 7 the next morning, I arrived at the office. Malcolm was already at his desk. He was the kind of person who didn't need an alarm clock, not out of discipline, but out of anxiety. Anxiety woke him at 5 every morning, and once awake, he couldn't fall back asleep, so he might as well come to work. He saw me and said, "Your dad called the front desk 7 times. What did he say?" "Every time he says, 'I'm Grace's father.' The receptionist Chloe doesn't know who your dad is, so she transferred it to me." "What did you say?" "I said Miss Grace isn't available. Asked if she wanted to leave a message." "She?" "It was your stepmother. After the 3rd time, it was your stepmother who hit you." I sat down at my workstation and turned on the computer. "Then there's no need to reply." Malcolm didn't ask why. He was a smart man. Smart people know that some questions don't need answers. At 9:30 in the morning, the A-share market opened. My model started running. A string of numbers flashed across the screen: open positions, close positions, profit and loss. 230,000. 470,000. 920,000. By the time the market closed at 3 in the afternoon, I had made 4,200,000 today. Enough to cover Dingtai Capital's payroll for a month. I closed my laptop. A new leaf had sprouted on the pothose plant on the windowsill. I watered it. Then I picked up my phone and called my mother. "Mom, I'm coming back to Shijiazhuang this weekend." "Great. What do you want to eat?" "Dumplings." "What filling?" "Whatever you make is fine." She smiled. "Then I'll make chive and egg ones. You've loved them since you were little." "Okay." "Grace." "Your dad called me last night." I paused. "What did he say?" "He said he wants to see you." "What did you say?" I said, "Grace is an adult. When she wants to see you, she'll reach out on her own." She added, "Then he said one more thing." "What?" "He said he's too ashamed to face you." I held my phone, gazing out at Beijing. Sanlitun. East 3rd Ring Road. The endless stream of traffic. This city had no idea what happened last night. And it didn't need to. "Mom." "For that plate of dumplings, add a little more vinegar." She laughed again. "All right, a little more vinegar." I hung up the phone. The pothose on the windowsill stretched its leaves in the sunlight. I touched the silver bracelet on my left wrist. My mother's. Mine. 2 identical ones. 300 kilometers apart, across different cities, across a completely different life. But we wear the same bracelet. That's enough. As for my father, when he wants to see me, he calls. Not the front desk, not Malcolm, not my mother. He calls me. He'll find my number himself. Because a man who survived 30 years in finance still has that much ability. I'll wait. No rush. I've already waited 5 years. Waiting another 5 years wouldn't matter either. Because now, time is on my side,